everyone. I'm Sarah McCann. I am GAMA's Director of Communications, and welcome to the 2018 State of the Industry Press Conference. Thanks so much for joining us today. To get us started, I'm going to call up to the podium Phil Straub, GAMA's Chairman, and Garmin Aviation Executive Vice President and Managing Director. Come on up, Phil.
Well, thank you for being here. As Sarah said, welcome to the GAMA 2018 State of the Industry. I'm so glad to be here today with all of you, and thanks again for joining us. In just a moment, I'll review the numbers, and afterwards, we'll show a short video we've made for this year's event. Then we're going to host a panel discussion about important issues for our industry and association, and featuring some of our GAMA leadership and our committee chairmen. Then, if there's time, we'll take questions from the audience. But to begin, I'll share the numbers with you, starting with Piston airplane shipments. Piston airplane shipments increased 6.5% from 1,019 to 1,085 units. The segment had one of its better years since the end of the recession. The results are mixed among companies, but several larger companies had positive, strong results. Piston airplane billings increased 8.6% from $661 million to $718 million. This is the largest value of piston deliveries since 2008. Geographically, North America remains the largest share for deliveries at close to 2/3 of airplane units, but contracted slightly. The Asia-Pacific region was the second largest geographic region for piston airplane deliveries, with a notable increase from 10.2 to 13.4%. This is a result of training aircraft deliveries and fleet training centers. Turboprop airplane shipments. This segment saw a slight decrease by 3.3% from 582 to 563. Single-engine turboprops strengthened, especially agricultural airplanes and new models. The darker blue shade on the graph indicates agricultural data, which we began reporting in 2011. Turboprop airplane billings decreased to $1.5 billion, a decline of 12.6%. The larger drop in billings is more of a product mix, shifting some of the lower end of single-engine turboprops versus the twin engine. Geographically, North America remains the largest share for deliveries at slightly over half, 54.2% to be exact. But it also saw a shift compared to 2016. There was growth in the European market share and in Latin America market share at 15.5%, representing the second largest geographic region. Business jet shipments increased from 667 to 676 units, an increase of 1.3%. There was growth in the lighter end of the segment, especially in new models. The mid-size market contracted. Similarly, there was a slight slowdown in the greater than 50,000-pound large cabin category. This is what you'll see on the next slide, with billings down while units are up. So based upon the mid-size and large jet segments decreasing, the value of the market declined by 3.9%. Distribution stayed relatively stable, with an uptick in North America, which remains the largest market for business jets at 63.8%. Europe is the second largest segment at 17% of the airplanes delivered. Okay, on to rotorcraft. So piston rotorcraft shipments are up by nearly 18%. Billings, as a result of unit growth, grew by 12.6% to $107 million. The turbine rotorcraft category, shipments are up by 3.9% at 662 compared to 637 units in 2016. Billings in this segment increased slightly by 1% to $3.6 billion. This year, we're able to report avionics numbers as well. We're proud to share that with you, thanks to the Aircraft Electronics Association for providing that data. Total worldwide business and general aviation avionics sales exceeded $2.3 billion in 2017, according to the 23 companies that participated in reporting. This is a 2.9% increase in total sales over the previous year. The retrofit market is the driving force behind the overall sales. Retrofit sales were up 20.1% year over year. This increase reverses 2 straight years of declining sales and was the first year-over-year increase since 2014. This concludes our numbers presentation for the event. I'm going to ask Pete to come up and talk to you a little bit more.
Well, thank you, Phil. Great job, and I'd like to accompany Phil up here on the stage with some familiar faces for you, but last year we instituted the concept of having a panel discussion instead of you just listening to me talk about issues up there. So I'd like to have Phil joined by Chuck Whipplinger, the head and president of Whip Air. So Chuck, would you come on up? We've got David Vanden Langenberg, and David is the head of our Airworthiness and Maintenance Policy Committee. David runs Lux Aviation as a technical officer over there, so he's involved in both maintenance and operations. Chuck is the head of our Technical Policy Committee. And then last but certainly not least, Simon Caldecott, our previous past chairman and the head of Piper. So could you all welcome these gentlemen to the stage? Thank you. So before we dive into the questions, I wanted to show you a quick video, and I think that you'll notice that when you see the video, it's not the typical one that we show as manufacturers. We show a lot of our products, a lot of what we put our pride in on our fixed wing and rotorcraft aircraft. But really, this video is about our most precious resource, and that's the men and women that work in this tremendous industry. So please roll the video.
There's a lot of opportunity in general aviation. In about every different discipline within aviation that you can imagine, from pilots to air traffic control to engineering, manufacturing, all kinds of things.
I'm an operations engineering technical specialist.
I am a drafter.
I'm a systems engineer.
I'm an airframe and power plant mechanic.
I'm an avionics technician.
I'm a flight test pilot.
I'm a manufacturer assembly.
I'm an aviation systems and programs engineer.
I design the parts.
I install systems on the aircraft and test and perform maintenance.
I modify the aircraft so that way it can be adapted to be mounted on these floats so that they can change the mission of the aircraft.
I work with a lot of customers and a lot of OEMs in defining the right product for the right aircraft.
I create mechanical drawings that are then shipped over to manufacturing.
We'll have flight tests go fly, and we'll find things that engineering didn't find.
We pay a lot of attention to what pilots say.
Problem solving.
Problem solving.
And using problem-solving skills.
I was like figuring out like, okay, why does that happen?
I troubleshoot problems on the aircraft.
Why does that happen?
I'll go talk to the operators on the floor, mechanics, see what they're seeing.
Every time I fix something, I just get this sense of like adrenaline. I'm like, yes, we got it.
I'm an artist. I like to work with my hands.
To go from just a raw piece of aluminum to seeing a wing and then an aircraft roll out.
You see a brand new plane come in and you tear it down to almost nothing and modify things.
How do we use our engineering skills to make that happen?
And you see the whole airplane come together.
The most gratifying moment is when you see the plane actually leave.
This is somebody's baby.
People really appreciate the effort that you put in to getting their aircraft done.
They really appreciate the hard work that goes into it.
It's fun to see something I've made take off.
People don't treat it like a job anymore. It's my project, it's my program.
I saw one of my airplanes and I was just so excited because I was like trying to keep it chill, you know, but I was like, that's my airplane.
It makes me go home feeling like I did something. I just built something pretty sweet.
It's a really exciting time to be in aviation.
There's always a buzz here about what's coming next.
We're all trying to take that next big step and bring technology into the smaller cockpit.
We create tools and equipment and resources that crews can use to improve the safety.
You've got three-dimensional models, you've got computer-aided systems, you've got robotics, and you've got skilled technicians all coming together.
I use a lot of AutoCAD 3D modeling programs. We also use a ferro laser scanner to
move coordinate systems into the computer.
The speed of technological advancement,
That's where the magic happens.
it's really kind of a big deal.
If you were trying to think of something absolutely out of the box, we'll find a way to make it work as long as it's safe and clear and it helps the pilot.
Every day is a challenge, and every day I'm learning new things.
Just keep seeing different things.
It's fun, it's changing.
You're really getting after it, you're really having fun.
You can be creative.
This is a challenging career.
It's driven by a lot of passion.
It's amazing what we can do.
It feels like family.
We've experienced tremendous growth in the general aviation industry over the past 5-10 years. We are set up to continue that growth well into the future.
It creates jobs up and down the line.
These are really good skilled jobs.
It really is a huge economic driver.
General aviation has a huge impact on our local economy.
It's always the cool factor associated with the aviation industry.
It's cool. My daughters are like, we see one, it's so cool, you know. It's like, yeah, your dad makes those.
At the heart of everything, general aviation connects people.
So we sent our videographers just to 3 companies. Obviously, over to Phil's house there at Garmin and Olathe, Chuck over there in St. Paul, and of course down to Savannah with Gulfstream. And Mark Burns sends his regrets. He was called away by corporate. He couldn't be here today, but you can see the pride that each and every one of our men and women have, and that's just 3 of our companies of over 100 of them that we love to showcase. But when we finished the video, and I sent it out to these gentlemen earlier in the week, you know, Chuck's grandfather started his company, and Chuck wrote me back right away. He goes, "Can I show it to my dad?" and everything. And I thought that was just indicating how much enthusiasm there are for the people in this industry. So Chuck, I'll start with you. How do you think the industry is doing, and what does this show about the people, men and women we have working in our industry?
Thanks, Pete. You know, everyone loved the video. Dad, my senior leadership team, and my senior leadership team and I sat down to document our core values as a company, and ironically, 2 of them line up very well with the industry as a whole. Very technical, skilled employee base. Whip Air, like all the other ones, the labor and the people that work for us are very technically adept. 2, as you saw at the fun meter, we like to have fun. Our last core value is, you know, don't forget about your inner child, have fun. And it very much comes out across the industry, I think. But it's there's a lot of change, technological change coming into the industry, and we need these technical, skilled people to continue on.
Phil, any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I was reflecting on that sitting here, and I was thinking, I'm sitting in front of all of you, so proud of these employees, and have I told them that enough directly myself? But what comes across, did you hear them say they talked about this is my airplane and my program? Just the ownership. And so those couple of program managers and systems engineers, they're working for some of your organizations out there, the aircraft manufacturers, but look at the ownership and the passion they feel. And as they talk about troubleshooting and creative new and innovative things. Grant, the flight test pilot, you know, he's been at Garmin a little over 10 years. I remember he started out the ranks as a flight test engineer. And like everyone, so many in that ranks aspires to be a flight test pilot. He's grown up and achieved that. So it's just inspirational for me to see that. And I have to go back and tell him that directly.
Simon, you have gotten a lot of publicity this year. You have had a tremendous year. I mean, what does that mean for your workforce?
It means a lot of growth, actually, Pete, and creating a lot more good jobs in our industry. Last year, we increased our workforce by 25%, and we're going to continue growing this year. But it's interesting. Everybody thinks about general aviation. It's about pilots and maybe engineers. But there's so many other jobs that we create. Everything from procurement people, quality engineers, industrial engineers, manufacturing. I mean, it's good for the economy, and it's certainly good for our industry with the growth. Now, in terms of why have we done so well, there is a global shortage of pilots. We keep hearing it. Every year Boeing puts out their forecast, and the forecast keeps getting bigger. So we know that there's a shortage of pilots, and they need planes to learn to fly in. So obviously Piper is doing its best to supply those planes.
And David, Lux Aviation, I mean, you've expanded. You're now in the rotorcraft world, going out to parts of the world that you weren't operating in before. This is a global industry that's expanding to all corners of the planet.
Today we have 16 AOCs, like commercial operations worldwide. We're in almost every continent. including South America, Asia, you name it. Not yet in the United States, but we'll be here.
Oh, that's great. Well, let me pivot actually, or narrow down a little bit to the U.S. because we all have experience flying all over the world, operating all over, and we have something precious here in the U.S. We have a system that no one else on the planet has or can replicate. In fact, Ed Bolin and I were at a briefing on Friday, and we were being briefed on how the U.S. is out advising the rest of the planet on how to maximize use of their runways. And they showed us some graphs about all of the different things that we can do that no one else does, and we're trying to teach the rest of the world. But then they showed a graph, and of all the places on the planet that can do triple runway operations, parallel runway operations, bring aircraft in at the same time, these 3 runways, there's only 7 of them on the planet, and all 7 are here in the U.S. So we have a gem that no one else has. And Phil, you have been, and Garmin and the leadership at Garmin have really been at the forefront to try to dispel all of the bad information that has been put out about somehow that the U.S. is behind the rest of the world and that we need to follow a privatization path for ATC. And of course, the president's budget came out last week, and again, there's another attempt to privatize ATC, and it drives us crazy that the information is just not accurate. What are your thoughts, sir?
Well, as you said, we've been very vocal about it. I wish we could just have an objective conversation, and you have to realize where I come from. I've been in the avionics industry for 25 years. I've been a pilot for over 30 years. So it provides kind of a unique view and perspective on these things going on. And when I came in the industry, think about it, GPS was not a household name, right? It was just coming into play. When we talk about next gen, it has pillars. One of those pillars is performance-based navigation. GPS is such a role in that. And when we measure our GPS approaches, we measure in thousands. Other countries maybe measure in hundreds. When I think about another pillar, surveillance, moving away from radar systems to ADS-B, we have a fully functioning ADS-B ground infrastructure since 2014. Not only does it provide traffic surveillance and visibility, but it also provides flight information service broadcast, or in other words, uplink, data link weather. No other country has that. We've been operational since 2014. And then the last pillar I think of and there's many pillars, right, or many parts of Next Gen, but operationally, as a pilot, as an avionics manufacturer, datacom. Right? As a pilot, the last thing you want to hear is stand by, get ready for your full route clearance, get ready to copy. I don't want to hear that, right? Datacom, we've got, 55 airports with departure clearances now at this point, and we're moving to the en route structure. I challenge you to name another country that has this level of infrastructure that's making our operations efficient and more safe. Most importantly, more safe when you think about moving away from those old ways of doing things. So yes, Pete, we're very passionate about it, and I think I'd love to move away from, when you fall into terms like jet setters and that type of thing, I think it's just obscuring the issue. Let's talk objectively about what we've achieved.
And really, when you look at traffic fatalities rising, even though we're giving more technology to folks on the road, we have increasing numbers of traffic fatalities. We're having more accidents in the rail sector, and yet we have the safest, most efficient system in the world. And you sit there and go, that adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, really comes into mind. But then we have people that fly in other parts of the world that get to experience what it looks like the other way. And David, you're a pilot. You fly over there in Europe. What's it like?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I had to work a bit on my skills, and I was with my brother flying at our regional airport last week. We took 2 of our little nephews with us because flying is fun, And just to give an example, the cost of flying in Europe, I'm not talking about the airplane or the gas, just like taking off, landing, doing a couple of patterns and 4 landings. All included, it was about $300 US, just for airport taxes, passenger taxes, and takeoff and landing fees. And that's at an airport where I learned to fly 30 years ago. It was a wonderful little airport. They had an aero club. They even had a little aero club dedicated for kids. They had a regional airline. Everything was there. But then the government decided that they were losing money on airports. So they rented the airport out to a private company. It turns into a business case. And what happens more and more, and I was at our airport last Friday on the presentation what the future of that airport will be. And these guys, they see volume. They see big jets. They wanna move passengers to other countries with the airline, low-cost carriers, name it. But the flip side of that is that all general aviation has to move out because they don't know. They are very cautious about noise abatement. They don't want fly schools anymore because they have to reduce 30 or like 23,000 operations on a yearly basis to 8,000. But if a government decides to make a business case out of what they should do and offer the freedom of flight, I don't think they're doing what they're supposed to do, in my opinion.
And when you look at what we already can do in this airspace here in the U.S., and we do it safely and so efficiently, and then we have these emerging technologies. Phil sits on the Drone Advisory Committee as our manufacturing rep and avionics rep there, but we are safely bringing those vehicles into the airspace, and we're going to talk a little bit later about urban mobility and some of the electric and type of propulsion. And then we go, especially down in Simon's part of the country, and now we've got commercial space entering the airspace, and we're doing it safely and efficiently. And again, if it isn't broke, there's no reason to fix it. And while we are stuck in this legislative limbo, while we're wrestling over an issue that we should just put to the side, i.e. ATC privatization, we need to get at some key issues, especially on the certification front, that are mired down and not moving forward because of being stalled over the ATC issue. And Chuck, can you outline for us what some of those important issues that are in both the House and Senate version of the new FAA reauthorization bill that we want to get across the goal line?
Yeah, there's, so being involved with TPC committee, there's a lot going on, and there's some good news here. We have, so thanks to a good working relationship with the FAA and also congressional oversight, things are moving. We've been talking about Part 23 rewrite for the last year. That's an implementation phase. That's going well. We've been doing some industry and FAA training, and they're training together, not separately, which is good to see. So hopeful that takes on the right culture there. We also have the ODA scorecard system, and that's been very helpful with getting FAA and companies like around in the industry to talk and have good dialogue, and what gets measured gets managed. So that's had a very positive effect.
Can you touch a little bit on ODA for those that aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so ODA is essentially it's a design organization that operates more autonomously without the FAA and gives more freedom and prerogative and takes the FAA out of the critical path of certification to some extent. And when they're allowed to do that, things go smoother, faster, and cheaper. But it's not always been the case that they've been allowed to do that. The FAA wants to remain involved and gets involved. So the scorecard has helped us gauge where we can do better as industry and as the FAA to get that autonomy and do what we need to do. So again, what gets measured gets managed, and we've had great success there. Another good stepping stone, the industry guidebook to product certification was published this last year. So that's a good reference tool for industry to use to plan for efficient certification process. Those are just a few of the things going on. Another big one, bilateral agreements. The FAA has signed with Transport Canada and some good bilateral agreements that will make product validation and certification a lot smoother and quicker. I believe ANAC is going to sign on to that as well. So that was a big win, really.
Which is our Brazilian Aviation Authority.
Yep. So, I mean, these are just a few of the things going on. AIR transformation, another big one that's making good progress. They actually just stood up a ARC, a rulemaking committee. It's I believe they call it the Safety and Oversight of Certification ARC. Michael Thacker is the industry co-chair of that from Bell, and I'm also on that committee as well. So that'll be a great way for the FAA and industry to dialogue on AIR's transformation and change in culture as they move forward.
Well, it's certainly, we are really seeing change in the FAA, and we're helping to guide that change. In fact, we had an opportunity with our leadership team to be over with Ollie Barami and his safety staff, both Dorinda Baker and John Duncan from both the flight standards and the certification side. But the important thing, I think, in the legislation is for us to be able to use those delegated authorities, that we sometimes have specialists that don't allow us to do it, and then also to leverage the bilateral safety agreements across the pond so that we rely on each other's safety competencies so we can speed product to market. And Phil, Simon, if you could just mention, Chuck mentioned ODA, our delegated authorities, but it's not a small task for a company to go and expend the effort and align so that they can go and have the FAA bless them as having an ODA so that you can go on now and be able to move product. And they're more now into an oversight role where they look at your processes and everything. Can you explain that a little bit?
I'll take it, and Simon, feel free to pick up. But ODA, as Chuck started to say, is really instead of an individual delegation system where you delegate individuals to do certain compliance functions for the FAA, it's recognizing the entire organization as capable of doing type certificate and supplemental type certificate projects. So it's a big investment that we make. And we recognize as an industry, it's a privilege, right? We're not entitled to that, but it's a privilege, and we work hard to do that and show that we have that capability. And the FAA, in turn, finds us capable of doing these projects. The difficulty has been that they still tend to want to have involvement in the projects. It's hard to recognize, yes, we found that organization capable, let them go run and be efficient. They really, as Pete said, need to focus on just managing our processes, make sure we're doing the things we say we're doing for safety. And then they can also focus on new and emerging technologies more effectively. As we talk about autonomous vehicles and simplified vehicle operations, we need a lot of FAA help and rulemaking and setting guidance for that. So focus on those areas where there's so much opportunity and new and novel things, and let us run the processes where we've been shown capable to do it.
So I'll reiterate a little bit of what Pete said. I mean, I think this is the 6th year this year where the leadership from GAMA have been able to sit down face to face with the leadership from the certification branch of the FAA and create a good relationship and a good working dialogue and set the foundation that the GAMA staff can then, on our behalf and the industry, work these issues with the FAA. And certainly, reiterating what Phil said, I mean, our objective is to be able to certify products quicker. The quicker we can bring some of these new technologies to market, the better, because most of the things that we're doing are enhancing safety of the products, which is good for everybody.
David, while we've been focusing on the U.S., things have not stood still across the Atlantic. And over in Europe, there's some pretty monumental changes happening with the way our industry is regulated from EASA. Can you touch on those?
Absolutely. There's the upcoming new basic regulation, where GAMA also was highly involved in discussing with the regulators in the European Commission and the European Parliament in Brussels. And there are major opportunities. Most of all, the single EASA certificate. So EASA will be able to issue a certificate to a company that has several locations all over Europe, which will take away a little bit the local authority, because that has been up till today the biggest problem in Europe. Because there's one EASA system, but every national authority, they have their own way of looking at things, and that for us, having in Europe alone many operations, has always been an issue. It's such an issue that even it could become a safety issue. But now with EASA, giving EASA the possibility to taking over that role and giving a single EASA certificate, that could be a great win for companies like who wants to do that or like us. Of course, to show that safety improves, you need to measure safety, and that has always been an issue in Europe, because they are very proud on their system. They're very proud on their robust EASA systems and the licensing and stuff. But how can you be so sure if you don't have a good metrics? And that's what's missing today. And that's also part of the new regulation, that the tools will be there and that we can gather and pull data and that we can actually see what we are doing. Is that the good direction, yes or no?
Flying in Europe is different. You contend with a lot more airspace restrictions. You have a lot of weather all the time, and it's interesting to us that heretofore we've been just using U.S. data because that's where it was collected, and I think this is really a sea change. And I know, Simon, you're passionate about this. You chaired our safety committee, but exactly what David said, once we're able to measure it and get European safety data aggregated between all these countries, now what kind of analysis can we do to be able to make flying safer?
So if I'll just back it up to what we did with GAMA and the joint steering committee on aircraft safety, I mean, we're able to get a lot of data and do a Pareto analysis of the root cause of accidents and incidents, and then we can focus on what the issue is and work with the various suppliers to create technology. So a good one was angle of attack, loss of control. So, you know, the committee here right now is working on power plant failure. What's the root cause of that? So by getting data, we can get to the bottom of the problems. And the more data we have, obviously, the better the fidelity of that data. So obviously, getting the European data is going to help us overall. It may even change the current view that we have here today.
And it's so important, and I think the proof is in the pudding. We had an opportunity to sit around, all of my friends here that are the other association heads, and sit down with Administrator Huerta before he left at a safety conference where we actually looked at what an incredible safe year we had in general aviation over the last year. We're making progress on both fixed wing and rotorcraft to such an extent that we industry are pushing the FAA and say, let's set a more aggressive target. Because we are now, we're doing great things in training, we're providing safety enhancing technology that is making flying safer. And we are moving the needle dramatically. And we do that by analyzing this data and starting to do predictive analysis. So I'm excited to where it can go. And with the single EASA certificate, both on ops and on maintenance, I mean, for you to maintain aircraft in multiple different countries over in Europe, it's just a nightmare.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a great opportunity, Pete. If with that single EASA certificate, if we can have all the manuals and the procedures, the oversight run out of Cologne, out of EASA directly, it's going to be a big win for companies, and I think it's only common sense.
Absolutely. Well, we've all kind of teased out a little bit about what, and conversations we've had so far today is about this revolutionary change we see coming in aviation, something that I think captures our interests. Not since the dawn of the jet age do I think that we probably had opportunity like we have now with being able to look at what electric and hybrid propulsion and simplified vehicle operations can do for aviation and where potentially this could go. Phil, I think I'd like to start with you and just talk about what potential do you think is out there? You know, we think of the Jetsons, we all watched it as kids and everything. Is that going to happen?
Well, you know, I don't have the best crystal ball, but I can tell you that the building blocks of achieving that are in what we're doing now and today. So when we talk about simplified vehicle operations, it's really about, in my mind, and I say this as a pilot, you know, the pilot is probably the weakest link in the loop. So what we're trying to do is give the pilot more information relevant to when they're operating. So control flight into train. With train databases and making that information available, that's drastically reduced control flight into train. Runway incursions, that's a big issue. If you have two runways or you have airplanes on an occupied runway, that's a big issue. So airport moving map databases are helping there. We talked about the GA Joint Steering Committee. In-flight loss of control, that's a leading cause of fatal accidents for general aviation. So things like envelope protection, trying to put this bound around the pilot, those are all things that are leading to autonomous type of operations. And so there's a lot of goodness to be had just for manned aviation as we know it, as we work to those incremental rungs of getting to that view of autonomous aviation.
And Chuck mentioned Part 23, CS23 in Europe, we now have a regulation in place that is able to get regulators from all over the planet. Everyone's working on this. I think, David, you see it in Europe all the time. There are great companies working on this, and we now have a regulation to be able to put these vehicles in the air.
There's a lot of new developments. It's really exciting. If you see like the new ways of propulsion, electric motors and stuff, it's really something that's close to the heart of European aviators because of the environmental issues, which is really concerning Europe, noise abatement. And I think if we as an industry are smart, there's a lot of development and new technologies and new projects that we can look into, and that's very exciting for the years ahead.
Simon, any thoughts on this?
So I'm just going to go back to the Jetsons thing. Everybody thinks, oh, that was a long time ago, it's a bit wild, but it isn't. I remember 9 years ago, I went for my interview down in Florida. It's the first time I ever drove a hybrid car. And here we are today, everybody talks about Tesla. It's very quickly moved, and that was one of the early hybrids. It was a Prius, which is probably the most popular one. All of a sudden, this whole technology in the auto industry has moved rapidly to where a lot of people now producing electric cars. The electric and hybrid aircraft are not that far away. I was down in Phoenix back in November. I was driving around, and there's 2 different companies, well-known ones, you all know who they are, with driverless cars being tested down in Phoenix. I was there last week, and I see 2 other brands down there now. So there's a lot of people. It's moving very quickly. And it's interesting, but the technology they're using, the sensors, the auto controls, a lot of those are technologies that came from aviation industry. So as Phil said, we've got the building blocks. It's not far away.
And it's amazing when we talk to the auto industry and they come and they say, you got a simpler problem to solve. You got 3 dimensions to work in versus 2. It's actually, and those experts are telling us, boy, we'd love to be in aviation. A lot of them have come from aviation, are going to come back. And we've got a lot of automotive companies that are diving into this space very rapidly, international automotive companies. So it's an exciting time. But let's talk for a second about what the issue is at hand, and that's equipping the fleet we have right now with some technologies to be able to help with control. Phil, obviously you have a lot of aircraft out there that are in the process of not only equipping but also doing some new software upgrades to existing avionics in that. And if you look at the mandates that are coming forward, what's your view? They're up on the screen right now. January 1st, 2020 is not very far away, but also there's a fans mandate, and then later in 2020, the European mandates just like the US.
Well, the FAA has said, the mandate's not moving. So the time is ticking right now. And not just Garmin, right, but there's a lot of avionics companies that have provided a lot of cost-effective solutions that scale from lower-end, simple versions up to more capable versions. And so what we're seeing as a company is there's a certain amount of capacity out in the dealer network to install these devices. And we're starting to see lead times get up to even as much as 6 months, I've heard of. And even shop hourly rates are going up when you look at a supply and demand type situation. And many customers, when they go in, they don't just want to do ADS-B. They want to do these other things they've put off for some time. So that's some of the growth we're seeing in the AEA data with retrofit avionics sales. So I think if you haven't equipped with ADS-B yet, you really need to get that time scheduled and get in there because, again, the FAA said the mandate is not moving.
Chuck, you have an avionics shop. From your perspective, you're obviously working on a lot of aircraft on the piston side of the house, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, so on the piston turbine side of the house, utilitarian side of things, I'm seeing some hesitation. People are slowly starting to go, but I think it needs to accelerate because they're going to get caught flat-footed. I don't really know why they're hesitating, but they are. It could be, I don't want to deal with it today, I'm going to sell the airplane anyways. Whatever the reason, we recommend you start going down that path of getting it done. We started tracking in 2014. We only did a handful. 2015 was about the same. All of a sudden, 2016, we tripled the number we did. 2017, we added about 2/3 more onto that. And 2018 here, we're going to remain kind of flat. And I think we're remaining kind of flat because we're reaching labor capacity. And of course, you need that skilled technical workforce to put those in, and they don't just grow on trees. We got to find more of those folks out there. So there's 160,000 aircraft in the system. There's a kind of a guess of that we're going to get about 100,000 of them equipped. We're at 50,000 now. About half of the piston and turbine fleet, I think, are converted. We're sitting at 20% of business jets and only about 10 or 15% of rotorcraft converted.
On the rotorcraft side, those operating in the Gulf, we know were very early adopters after the Capstone, very successful Capstone project in Alaska. But a lot of those rotorcraft will be operating under the Mode C or the Class C and B Vales that are operating out there. And of course, business jets, everybody's got to operate above 10,000 feet. So I think we've all got concerns there. But I want to touch on something you said. You know, as demand starts to increase as we get into 2019, you have finite labor. What happens to that cost of labor, and what happens to the customer that waits longer and longer to be able to equip?
It's going to get more expensive for them. Basic economics, limited capacity is going to drive price up. So.
Simon,
I was going to say, I think a lot of people have been waiting, thinking that the cost of the equipment is going to continue to come down. It came down considerably from the very early offerings from the avionics suppliers, but it's probably bottomed out now. And as Chuck says, as the shops, as it gets nearer the deadline, the shops are filling up already. I know Lauren Hertline, one of the members of the Gamma staff, she recently bought herself a Piper Cherokee, and she was smart on two fronts. One was to get a Piper Cherokee. The other thing, as a responsible member of the GA community, she knew she needed to put ADS-B in there. So recently she went to inquire about getting ADS-B fitted. The shop said, you can bring it now, we can do it today because we've got a slot, otherwise you're going to have to wait till the end of April. So that lead time is going to get longer. And you know, as the horizon gets there, the capacity is going to reduce for those people. So the need, that date is not going to move. The FAA have said it loud and clear, and it's, while we're saying 2020, it's the 31st of December, 2019. So get equipped.
And even if it is your intent to just sell the airplane and not equip with ADS-B, it'll be worth more if it's got ADS-B to the buyer in it. Because someone's got to put ADS-B in it at some point.
Absolutely. And David, obviously fans is very important for your fleet out there of a lot of business jets and everything. You seeing any trends on equipage that concern you there?
For us, it's more the issue with the capacity and having sufficient staff that has the skills to do it. It's not so much that people don't want to install it; they know it's a mandate, so they have to do it. And there's a strong oversight from the regulators. But just finding the slots and the skill set to do it is becoming an issue for us.
Well, that's great. Well, I think we've given a lot of people some food for thought, and I'll be looking forward to hearing the questions that we have. But what we all like to do when we complete talking about our industry is going in and talking about how the industry does give back. And I think if you look at 2017 and look back at the natural disasters we had out there and the challenges that we had for the industry, I think, Lonnie, if you can call up the next slides there, but our companies really had a banner year in being able to go out and do projects to be able to bring the community together, whether it's to be able to support those hurricane relief efforts, but also just community projects and also STEM, which is, I think, we're all very excited about. The robotics competitions and what our companies are being involved in the educational world. I know we have the Gamma STEM competition, but our other sister associations have good competitions going on, and it's all about how we build that future workforce. And we're very proud of what Gamma has been able to do. And then Gamma has a very close relationship with three organizations that mean a lot to us. The first of which that we've had a very long-standing relationship with is the Corporate Angel Network. And when you're talking about being able to use Corporate Angel Network, and I think since it started in 81, and they just went over last year, 55,000 patients being carried and over 100 companies being able to participate. That's really a heck of a milestone. Of course, Veterans Airlift Command, for post 9/11 vets to be able to get them a capability to get transported, not only to medical care, but also to be able to get back with their brothers and sisters in arms that they fought with, and it just is tremendous for their morale. Just in last year alone, 2,600 veterans flown, and we have, or 1,600 passengers flown with 2,600 volunteer pilots out there in the space. And then the Recreational Aviation Foundation has forged a very special relationship with the GAMA board. Each year, our executive committee, we have a meeting that we do with the RAF board at different parts of the country. This last year, we did it in northern Wisconsin. This next year, we're doing it out in Idaho. And the amount of activity and the growth of an organization that's purely about building and preserving airstrips, both on public and private lands, and to be able to go and have the success that they've had this last year, opening up, working with the Department of Natural Resources over in Michigan to open up a two-hearted airstrip that opens up a river that opens up in Lake Superior, all the way down to Grapevine, opening up on the Roosevelt Reservoir down in Arizona, an airstrip that was abandoned and is brought back to use. So we have a tremendously great experience with them. But then I think I truly want to recognize all of us. What we did as a community, we together in support of the hurricane relief, whether it was in Houston or Florida or out in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and beyond that, as a community is just truly phenomenal. What year could you ever think of that you could have this many of them? And general and business aviation played such an incredible role in being able to do that. And I've got a list of organizations, Angel Flight Organization, everything else, and I won't read them all because I know I would miss some. But really, I think we ought to be very proud of what we were able to accomplish during this last year of hurricane relief, and hopefully Mother Nature will be kinder to us in the years ahead. So with that, at the end of this, after we finish questions and we break up, we've got a couple interesting things out of the financial networks that will play up on the screens talking about what people see as the advantage of bonus depreciation on steroids, you could call it, with 100% expensing that we got in the recent tax legislation, and on to electric and hybrid propulsion. So if you're interested, we'll have you stay. But with that, Sarah, I think we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience.
Any questions? Great. State your name.
Sure. Sarah Fuller with Rotor and Wing International. There was an audible kind of reaction, a gasp from the audience when we read the rotorcraft numbers from this past year, and I was wondering if you could expand upon that and comment on that a little bit more.
Do you want to start, Phil?
You know, I don't know that I have a lot of insight to offer for the low equipage rates with the rotorcraft market. Many of them, when you think about news gathering, emergency medical service, those type of operations in law enforcement are happening in metropolitan areas. So there are areas, Class B airspace, 30-mile Mode C Vail, where they really need to be equipped. And the FAA has really promoted and endorsed, you know, paired combinations that are shown to work. So you don't have to have an STC on each and every rotorcraft model for them to equip. So I don't have a lot of insight to why the equipage isn't higher, but I do know the solutions are there, and many of them are operating in areas that will be affected.
But I think the gasp on the other side of the house was with the good numbers that Phil presented here, and I think that was the other. Everybody's going, wow, and I wish every sector was up as much as we've seen on the rotorcraft side, but. After oil prices dropped precipitously, we saw a real decline in the rotorcraft market. But what I think we collectively, as we did the analysis on the data, we're excited about what's happening in the emerging markets that are out there. And also, rotorcraft are such that you know, there's a refresh rate that you need to do on rotorcraft because basically it's a more complex mechanical type of operation than the normal fixed-wing aircraft. So I think now there's some refresh going on in the industry that's made us all go, keep it going, keep it rolling. It's pretty good. Anybody want to add to that? Okay, next one.
Steve Pope with Flying. We're 6 months into the Part 23 rewrite now, so we don't have a tremendous track record with this rule change. But so far, from the panel, what are you seeing with the Part 23 rewrite? Has it met your expectations? Simon, have your engineers, do they have a good grasp of it? And is it everything that you really thought it would be?
Okay, thanks, Steve. Yeah, my engineers certainly do have a good grasp of it. They were part of the committee that helped formulate that and work with the FAA. And we're in the throes of running some projects through the new process now. And the main benefit is how we show compliance. So we can use more advanced methods using computer technology in a lot of cases to show compliance. In some cases, we can do it by similarity with previous certification programs. So it's going to have a big plus for us as we move forward.
I think the key, Steve, is all in the implementation. But what I think we've seen such a willingness by both regulators from the FAA and EASA to be wanting to be part of this process. We talked about electric and hybrid propulsion and simplified vehicle ops. They're in the room with us because we're developing the standards for that industry now. And Part 23 facilitates that quite a bit. But in these new projects that we have going forward, if it lies within the purview, the categories of Part 23, the FAA and EASA are very willing to say, okay, we've done the training, now let's go for it. Let's see how we can maximize it. So I think everything on that route is positive, and we're trying to export what we're learning in this Part 23 process to Part 25 and Part 27, 29 for rotorcraft. So I am excited about that. And then the energy that is behind being able to further retrofit the existing fleet with safety-enhancing technologies. I think that's got people also understanding that if we can look at how we do these standards, that there is a recognized way where you can go and speed getting these different technologies to the cockpit. And we've had great success between EASA and the FAA in using the bilateral safety agreement to be able to simplify the process of getting SDCs into simplified SDCs with basically we recognize each other's competency there, just say, go make it happen. And you guys want to add to that at all?
No, similar sentiments from us. We're kind of a little bit in the wait and see. It's being implemented. I think it's got a lot of potential. We just got to run a few projects through it and see what comes out. Like Simon, our engineers are pretty familiar with it. They went to the training, joint training with the FAA, and I've been involved in the process some too. So
I'm wondering, so you have to show compliance to the FAA, and some of these things are quite new and novel. Does that put your engineers into a position of having to be kind of sales representatives and sell the FAA on it? And is that a problem, do you think, for engineers?
Actually, Steve, the thing is simplified because we went from, I forget how many pages of rules down to fewer rules. Now, because we've got fewer rules, the means of compliance, we can still use the old method, but that might be cumbersome. There are more modern and advanced, computer technology nowadays. We can do analysis a lot quicker, maybe rather than doing physical testing. So things like that, and it's how you comply. It's not necessarily selling it to the FAA. The rule's there. We have to be able to show that we can comply to that. Now, they may, part of it is explaining our means of compliance, and do they buy into that? But in most cases, it's black and white.
And I'd just add, remember that phase one of this was taking everything that was codified in the regulations and moving it the prescriptive ways and moving it over into the standards. Kind of the phase two and where you get the benefit are these alternative means of compliance. And it just takes a little bit of time to leverage, to create those. And I don't know that I'd say sell it, but maybe creative ways of thinking about how can I achieve an equal or more likely a better safety level with the different means of compliance. And maybe a couple examples I'd say where we're looking at that or have used it would be software. So there are alternatives to the traditional DO 178B method or C method of software design assurance. And for the smaller airplanes as well, the high intensity radiated fields, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money showing HERF compliance for many, all kinds of airplanes. So looking at the lighter airplanes and say there may be a reduced or simplified way of doing that makes getting products to market quicker and more cost effective. And so you'll see more and more of that developing.
Okay.
Bill Garvey with the Business and Commercial Aviation Magazine. We recognize that there are a lot of training programs going on right now around the world to grow airline pilots, but meanwhile, the number of private pilots in the U.S. is down by 50%. And I'm curious as to, does that threaten the viability of light aviation in the United States? And will it be compensated by automated flight?
Simon, you want to start that one?
That's a good question, Bill. There's no doubt that the new technology will drive a change in the curriculum. I mean, and ironically, I actually sit on an advisory board with the FAA, and one of the topics we talked about earlier this year was, is the training curriculum for a private pilot today correct based on the technology that we're now putting in the cockpit? So, and then you can take it to the absolute extreme of, literally, does a person get in a plane and hit a button and it'll take him where he wants to go? You don't need to train them to do much of that. So I think there's going to be a shift in it. There's certainly going to be some changes. But right now, there's still a big demand for new pilots globally. How we stimulate the younger generation or more people to want to fly privately, that's still a big challenge for the industry. I think one of the things that we all can do is to help promote the technology factor, because I know, I mean, my grandkids, they know how to use the iPad better than me. So if they know they can get inside a cockpit and it's a big iPad, they'll have fun. And they may eventually be flying. In fact, I often put my grandkids in the cockpit, so.
But I would say, Bill, I think you know more than anybody else. I mean, we can't kid ourselves. The big bow wave of pilots has moved its way through the process, and we have a very interesting briefing that shows where that big hump keeps getting older and older and working its way through. You look at when tremendous number of aircraft were produced in the late 70s, and it correlates very closely with that bow wave. We're working it hard, all the associations, you know, third class medical has some impact on it, but I think left static, we're just going to see that bow wave get older and older, and finally they get old enough where they aren't going to fly anymore, unless you start introducing these new types of technologies where we have more people out there that have a different way that they get into a cockpit, and we can start regrowing that population. But for us to say realistically, are we ever going to get back to those numbers under its current state, I don't know how we could, but I think with this revolution that we have going on, we're pretty excited about it. And to that end, we're so excited about it that GAMA's embarking on our first ever, we're calling it e-aviation forum, that we are tacking on to the first day of AUVSI. It'll be on the 1st of May in Denver. We're intentionally tacking it along with AUVSI, although our sister associations, whether it's HAI next week at their convention or with Ed in his convention coming up, there are symposiums on these types of aircraft, but we want to get some of the standard bearers of technology within our industry to be able to get out and talk to the synergy that we can develop between the unmanned industry and also what we're trying to do with electric hybrid propulsion and simplified vehicle operations. And it's exciting, and we've got a lot of people very interested in it, both in government and outside of government. So this will be our first attempt to do that. In addition to that, the other thing that we have to pay attention to is on the environmental front. We have a 2020 date that we made an environmental commitment to as an industry to be able to go ahead and work toward our growth as being carbon neutral. Now, we all know that it has some market-based measures associated with it, but one of the biggest components for us is how are we going to employ biofuels into this arena. And this has all of the associations working together. Ed is a driving force within IBEC. Kurt Edwards wasn't able to join us today, but also NATA, Marty Hiller's here, and he's been working very hard. David Khalil at Bombardier is the head of our environmental committee, and we're very excited to have the industry rolling out at eBase in Geneva here in May, a ceremony where we're going to talk about how we're going to apply those fuels to all of our different turbine platforms, whether they're rotorcraft or fixed wing. And over the next year after eBase you're going to start to see different events rolling out where we start to talk about this as we prepare ourselves for what we're going to do in 2020. So we're excited about that as well.
Great, we're at 2 o'clock, so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions if there are any more. All right.
I'll just speak up.
Great.
Rob Coots, Granite Air Group. I'm curious, I think Simon, you're on the safety committee. You headed up. What's the position of SMS?
So I did chair the safety committee
Nicholas,
3 years ago.
Nicholas has it now.
Nicholas Chabert has it now. But in terms of SMS, right now there's a number of companies, and we're one included in that have been voluntarily putting in our own SMS system. But that will come down from the FAA before too long as a requirement. So people should be thinking about it and work with Gamma to make sure that we don't end up with something that's going to be a burden to companies.
That was a specific topic we brought up with Ali Barami this morning, and we are going to bring up with the acting administrator tomorrow at our meeting, because we do have some concerns that we are implementing these voluntary programs, but unless it's a actual program that the FAA endorses and we move toward, we could have complications on the international front because it's a mandated action by ICAO, and if we have other countries in the world saying, well, what is your SMS system, what's your formalized system, we want to make sure that we don't get ourselves into that situation. So we will be talking to the acting administrator about that.
Okay, last question of the day, if we can get the mic over there.
Pete, the privatization issue tends to be the fire that doesn't seem to go out, sucks all the oxygen away from all the other things that you talked about today that need to be done. Do you think there's a chance in 2018 that finally we'll be able to put that fire out and get people to realize what a dumb idea that is?
Well, the other side of the coin, though, is that Ed, Marty, and I might not have a job if the fire does get put out on that thing, right? You have to have associations for something, right? But I think that we've seen, I mean, this is my 14th year at Gamma, and I've seen it come up virtually the whole time, whether it's a Republican administration, Democratic Congress, or Republican Congress. I mean, it keeps getting up, and that's why it is so important for us to tell our story. And one of the ways that we implemented doing it at Gamma is by having these rallies where we can get in front of our legislators and have them stand and look into our workforce and talk to them about how important this industry is for the tax base of the community or the state or the federal government. And we have one coming up April 6th that Phil is going to host at Olathe, where Senator Moran, who has been our rock-solid stalwart throughout this whole discussion. I think Ed, Marty, and I are in his office all the time talking to him, and he's been a tremendous ally to us, and he's going to hold this rally. We will have many other Kansas legislators there. You're going to be a speaker, Randy, and everything, but we're, you know, the most important people in that audience is our workforce, and when a member of Congress has to look them in the eye and they get briefed by their staffs about, look at how valuable this industry is. That's how we tell our story, and we've all got different methods of doing that. I think No Pain, No Gain gives a lot of good data out there, but we can never stop to talk about the importance of this industry and about the gem that we have of aerospace and aviation. I mean, what other country on the planet can have commercial space growing like it is right now and integrating unmanned vehicles and now soon urban mobility vehicles and everything else? We can't screw it up, and so it's incumbent upon all of us to keep beating that drum as loud as we can. Well, with that, thank you very much for being with us today. Again, we'll leave you with a couple of videos in a few seconds, but thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
We talk about the winners and losers when it comes to the tax law. This is clearly one of the winners. Here's what's going on when you look at the business jet market. Talk with brokers right now and they will tell you it's increasingly tough to find a used business jet. Why? That's because of changes in the tax law, which we'll explain in just a little bit. But they're already seeing greater demand. Used prices are firming up, which we haven't seen in a number of years. And as I mentioned, it's because of the change in the tax law. If you buy a used business jet for business purposes, you now get a 100% bonus depreciation tax write-off. Used to be 50%. So that's a huge incentive for people like Marcus Adolphson. He is a owner of a business out of Gainesville, Florida. We caught up with him. He just bought this Embraer Phenom 100 jet for $1.7 million. To him, this was the thing that finally sealed the deal to make this purchase.
And this kind of came as a Christmas gift. I was already in the process of doing the pre-buy on this plane when I read through the tax law, and I thought, hey, 100% bonus depreciation on new end-use aircraft? Well, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to a number of people who will be buying a used business jet. As you take a look at shares of General Dynamics, which owns Gulfstream, we should point out that the head of their sales, we caught up with him in Singapore at the Singapore Air Show, and he said, look, we see a strong pipeline for 2018. What's happening, guys, is because of the demand in the used market with the change in the tax law, the expectation is that we will finally start to see greater demand in the new business jet market. You know, this is a boom and bust industry. This may be finally the boom that they've been waiting a number of years for, because they really have been down in the dumps, really struggling for traction since the recession.
We've talked a lot lately about self-driving cars. We're all waiting them to hit the market, but you're actually focusing on the potential for flying cars.
The flying car is here! It's about time. In the last month, 8 new flying cars, more appropriately named air taxis or personal drones, have launched. They are carrying test people. Now, there's absolutely no FAA approval for any of this stuff. The prices are, just pie in the sky imagining. Right now, they're just trying to get the engineering working. And they're basically drones, like we fly with our little phones, scaled up. So some of them can hold 1 person, some of them can hold 2 people. Do we have that video? Yeah. So this one is the Chinese one, the E-Hang. This thing has made 1,000 flights carrying people. Airbus has one they're working on. Boeing is working on. Uber's working on one. Google's working on one. Joby. So most of them are, all of them are electric. And the beauty of that is they're very, very quiet.
Okay.
So they're like 1/100th the sound of a helicopter. A lot of them have propellers like this one that rotate vertically. So these are VTOL, vertical takeoff or landing vehicles. So they can take straight up from a rooftop, and then the propellers rotate forward and they become airplanes. And they say that as mega cities become the future, we're going to need a way to get off the ground, out of traffic, and get where we're going. So all of these are autonomous. So you say where you want to go, it lifts off, it flies you there. Some of them have a joystick that you can take control if you want, but most of them are just totally autonomous. And they all have parachutes, and they all have redundancies. They work like regular drones in that if there's a problem, it just quietly lands in the spot. They all have collision avoidance.
Do you think this is actually going to catch on? Like
if it
in
were,
our lifetime, will we see it?
Yeah. They're saying 2020 for sales to commercial fleet.
Well, I mean, think you can do what a helicopter can do, just a little bit differently, right?
It makes me a little bit
I mean,
more
so we
nervous.
have helipads all over the place.
And actually, so Joby is an interesting one. Joby's not showing anyone their vehicle. Joby is the guy who invented the Gorilla Pod. The little, it's a mini tripod for your phone or camera with bendy legs that you can like hook onto a tree branch or something. The guy made billions and billions. He's got $100 million of investment from Toyota, Intel, and JetBlue.
Is this going to happen in China before it happens here?
No, the Joby's in California. And his whole
So they're not
5
scared. They're not
people.
scared of U.S. regulation. They're doing it here.
Yeah, they're doing it here. The Joby holds 5 people. Zunum Aero is are making regular electric planes that carry like a full plane load of people.
Yeah.
So all of these have very short range, like 20-minute flying time. And that's, as it is, we're lucky that composite materials and batteries and electronics have gotten to the point that these are possible at all. But yeah, so they're for short hops in cities 5 years from now.
Do you know what's the trade-off between the batteries you need and the weight of the batteries?
Yeah, I do.
Because that's a big issue in cars.
It's pi over the quantum imaginary number. No, it is. It's a balance between, the weight. You can put on more batteries, but then it weighs more. So it's a trick.
I'm a little skeptical.
About time. I've been waiting since 1999 to get my flying car. It's about damn time. Thanks for somebody getting on this.
I've been waiting since I watched the Jetsons.
That's what I'm saying. The Jetsons told us we'd all be flying around in cars.
All right.